Hello, this is James Cook, Assistant Professor of Social Science at the University of Maine at Augusta, and I'm here today for our criminology course in which we're reviewing some of the material from Exam 2 and from your Chapter 8 quiz that we didn't get as good a result on as I might have hoped. I'd like to get us back on track then. Exams should be for checking where we are. Quizzes should be for checking where we are. And here are 4 areas in which I think we're not where we need to be. So let's get back on track, and let me motivate you too by saying these questions, these subjects, what I present to you today, will appear on Exam 2. All the other exam material that most students got correct in their answers to questions will not appear, but these subjects will. Let's start with routine activities theory and the role of culture. Many of you selected an answer on your second exam that said, a culture of poverty is a factor in routine activities theory, but that's not true. Routine activities theory is a theory that stands apart from culture. You might think about cultural theories as suggesting why it is that some people would be feeling motivated to commit crimes, why they would have definitions of the situation that would be favorable to the commission of crime. But that's not the focus of routine activity theory. When routine activity theory talks about having a need for motivated offenders, people who are motivated to commit crimes, routine activity theorists say they're everywhere. That's not a problem. The problem is figuring out when those motivated people who are all over the place, according to those theorists, actually, when they get out and commit their crimes. So what matters then is the opportunity to commit crimes. And those opportunities are set by 2 factors. First of all, a suitable target. And by suitable target, we might think about the ease of obtaining the desired results. So a wallet would be easier to work with than a grand piano because you can't hoist a grand piano outside of a window as easily as you can pick up a wallet through an open window. A bicycle that's locked up might be a bit easier, and you can get away with a bicycle with a flat tire, okay? That might be locked up or not locked up, is less of a suitable target because you can't ride it away. A junker of a car is less likely to be stolen because it won't work. A car that works and can go fast is more likely to be taken. That's the suitability of the target. How easy is it to take it and do something with it? How easy is it to fence? Is it something like gold that can be melted down, or is it something that has a tracking code on it that can't be taken out? These are all aspects of whether a target becomes suitable or not. The second issue is one of capable guardianship. And this is a question of whether there are factors that make it more risky to commit the crime. If you have friends that are surrounding you, and they might see the commission of the crime, that would complicate things. They, in effect, become capable guardians. If there are nearby authorities, if there are police officers on the street, if there are security officers nearby, if you're at a school and then the principals are at the dance, or they put parents in there to be chaperones, those chaperones are there to be capable guardians. Also, if you notice, I say think about the NRA here, the National Rifle Association. One of the arguments they make is a routine activities theory kind of argument. It's the argument that says a gun is a capable guardian. That they make the claim, whether this is true or not, and if you actually look through some of our lectures, we've assessed this. Is a gun a capable guardian? The NRA says yes, and they would like to place more guns in the hands of safety officers in public schools with the idea that that would increase capable guardianship and thereby decrease crime. We know from looking at the statistics that actually schools in the United States are among the safest places for young people to be. The most dangerous places for young people in the United States to be are outside of school, and particularly in their own homes. So let's take a look at the next question, demography of victims. There was a question that said, which of the following demographic groups is most likely to experience criminal victimization in the United States? Was it A, white males, B, white females, C, Hispanic females, D, black males, or E, black females? Well, more than half of you got this answer wrong. The actual answer is black males. And let's take a look at some updated information that corroborates, that is consistent with the findings reported in your textbook that are leading you to that answer. First, let's just take a look at race. This is data from the National Crime Victimization Survey for the previous year. And if we take a look at the red bar, which is serious violent crime, or the blue bar, which is violent crime, both serious and less serious, for both categories, Black Americans have a higher violent victimization rate. That is, the number of violent crimes visited upon them per 1,000 persons aged 12 and over. If we look according to gender, we can see a similar pattern, both for serious violent crime and violent crime. This one is a little bit more subtle, but it's still consistent, that the female violent victimization rate is lower than the male violent victimization rate, again, per 1,000 people aged 12 and older. Why age 12 and older? Because the National Crime Victimization Survey doesn't survey people less than 12 years old. What about the combination of race and gender? Well, the Bureau of Justice Statistics takes a nice look at this with some data that is complementary to the National Crime Victimization Survey, that is regarding homicide, right? Because homicide victims are dead, they cannot be interviewed for the National Crime Victimization Survey, but we can take information about the race and gender of those crime victims, homicide victims. And if you take a look at the rate, now this is a rate per 100,000 population, from 1980 to 2008, there's a consistent difference between white males, black males, white females, and black females. The highest rate, if you look at the y-axis, which is the rate per 100,000, is clearly for black males. These are the individuals that are most likely to be killed. The next most likely group, well, it's close, but the next most likely group is black females. So in this case, race trumps gender. Right behind them is white males, and the least likely group to be victims is white females. This is another corroboration, if you're looking for more data. It comes from the Journal of Law and Criminology, a nice study that looked in 9 particular American cities and found a victimization rate. The highest one here per 100,000 population was black males. This was a homicide victimization rate. Okay, and the lowest rate, okay, white females. Okay, by far. So what's interesting about this is that the trend that you can find in this data is absolutely opposite to the cultural picture we have, and really the cultural picture that is provided by the images in the chapter of your Hagen book on victimization. Not the text, not the words, but the pictures. If you look at the pictures, there are 4 pictures of victims in the victimization chapter for the Hagen textbook. And 3 of them are clearly white females, and the 4th is placed in a blue tint, looks Caucasian, and is either a girl or an effeminate boy. and it looks like a girl to me. But there's this pictorial representation of victimhood. What is it? White female. But that is the least common category of criminal victimization. And this is where the shadow of sexual assault hypothesis becomes a really important player, because there's one place where it turns out that females, both black and white, are more likely to be victimized, and that's in sexual assault. And it turns out that that form of criminal victimization is so salient in our culture that it dominates our perception of all crimes and all criminal risks. Even when you take a look at violent victimizations of all sorts, even including serious ones, men, and black men in particular, are much more likely to be victimized than females, and white females in particular are the least likely. Okay, let's move on to focal concerns theory. The question was, it was a challenge, a short answer question. Name two of the focal concerns that, according to criminologist Walter Miller, lead participants in a lower class culture toward a life of crime. And for those of you who chose to answer this question, and many of you chose just to skip it, indicating that this was not a strong suit for you either, the most common answers were things like, oh, the focal concerns are, well, they were concerned with their poverty, and they were worried about how they might get by in life, and then therefore they were driven to crime. Or they were concerned about their disruptive home life, or they were concerned about the social disorganization around them that led to anomie, which is normlessness. And that is not the case. Not the case. This is not what focal concerns theory is about. Look it up in your textbook. It actually states that apart from anomie, forget anomie, according to focal concerns theory, there's a strong culture, a distinctive culture among lower class, working class, poor individuals, a way of life, a way of thinking that leads to the commission of crime. It is one that has values. It's not that it doesn't have values, it has values. But what are the values? Well, here's where the culture of poverty comes in. Okay, not for routine activities theory, but for focal concerns theory. The culture is one of toughness. You got to be tough. Okay, so that means you're more likely to get in confrontations. Troublemaking. Being a troublemaker is this positive, rebellious trait, according to Walter Miller. Having street smarts, as opposed to book smarts, as opposed to the kind of smarts that you would show being part of an organization, it's the smarts on the street that matter. Seeking excitement, looking for a good time. Finally, not seeing that what happens to you is a matter of your own control, but rather that it is something that just happens to you. So you're just a victim of fate. If things happen, like you get arrested and you go into jail, it's not something you had control over. Well, that could lead you to be more likely to find yourself out of control if you don't see yourself as the source of control, right? If we think about control theory. And finally, autonomy from the dictates of authority is important. Standing up to the man is this concern for a focal concern for lower class, poor individuals, according to Walter Miller. And it's a concern, it's a cultural emphasis that leads to the need to show these behaviors, to demonstrate that allegiance with that culture that can lead to you getting arrested. Finally, let's talk about labeling theory. There was some confusion about labeling theory in general, how it related to secondary deviance, and finally, what that had to do with moral entrepreneurs. So, let's go into that in a little bit more detail. For labeling theory, this labeling process is affected by, first of all, who's doing the labeling? Is it like your mom, or is it your brother, or is it a law enforcement official? Is it someone with legal legitimacy in the eyes of others and status, like a judge? Okay. And second, it's affected by how the labeled person reacts. The idea of labeling theory is that the labeled person reacts to what labels are placed upon them. It is, if you think in terms of Sociology 101, a symbolic interactionist theory in which a person's identity is the expectations of others for your behavior brought in to oneself and turned into one's own view of themselves. Who am I? I am what others expect me to be. If others tell me I'm criminal, especially at an early age, well, maybe that's who I am. That's what they expect of me. That's what I'm going to do. That is labeling theory in a nutshell. The idea is that this deviant label, someone is called drug abuser, at risk, criminal, that label becomes this pivotal status that is overriding all these other attributes. It is, in other words, to return again to Sociology 101, a master status, one that dominates all others and changes the way that people are seen in all aspects of their life. You may have encountered this in school. There are the good kids and there are the bad kids. And you may have memories of the good kids getting away with murder. Maybe not literally murder, but getting away with a lot of stuff. Why? Because they were seen as the good kids. So people weren't looking out to see what they were doing. People weren't watching their every move. And if they got in trouble, what could they do? Oh, they could cry a little or get upset or say, oh gosh, I sure didn't recognize that would have been a problem, sir. And boom, they get off. But the bad kid can't get away with anything. And they're being watched all the time. Finally, they say, fine, you want me to be the bad kid? I'll be the bad kid. If I'm going to get in trouble, I might as well at least have a little bit of fun. That idea of what plays out in the schoolyard and in the school building can also apply through labeling theory to what happens with courts, with diversion programs, with these other ways we react to young people who break the law. Do we call them criminals? Do we put them in a criminal position? If so, we may be imposing that identity on them that they then act out according to. The idea here, to connect it to primary deviance, is that there's a cycle. It starts with some individual behavior, primary deviance. It's a truism of crime novels that we've all committed crimes. I've committed some crimes, okay? They're long ago, far away, and none of them matter anymore, right? But you probably have committed some crimes too if you look at the books. The question is, what's happened? Okay. Did I enter the criminal justice system? No, not as a defendant at any point. I never was labeled as a criminal. And so I ceased those activities which, strictly speaking, were criminal when I was young. What would have happened if I'd been gotten in the court system? What if I'd gotten a record? What if I were put on probation? What if I were put in a juvenile detention facility? What if I were put in a juvenile diversion program? What if my school principal and other people in my community came to know that I was the sort of person who was a criminal? Well, I would have committed that primary deviance, but then there would have been a visible penalty by authorities, and others would have reacted in a way that would have reaffirmed to me that, yeah, that's who you are. That is what you are. It would lead me to change how I feel about myself if everyone around me is calling me that. Maybe that is who I am. Those are the expectations others set for me. Those are the expectations I will fulfill. Finally, we go back up to the top with a piece of secondary deviance in which the individual reacts to this new label that is placed on them, and that new label leads to a self-identity that leads to new crime. Authorities' response to crime especially among those who are forming their identity, can lead to more crime. So where does the idea of a moral entrepreneur come in here? A moral entrepreneur is mentioned in your textbook, but let's expand on this. It was also mentioned when we talked about moral panics. So let's return to that lecture as well. These moral entrepreneurs are rule creators or rule enforcers. They're moral crusaders, people who, in the words of Howard Becker in 1963, in his study Outsider Studies in the Sociology of Deviance, says that these are people who feel that nothing can be right in the world until there's some rule that's made to correct some problem, whether that is drunken driving, or that problem is teen pregnancy, or that problem is alcohol, or that problem is tobacco, or some kind of drug, or pornography. Now, there are two questions. The first question is this something that is harmful? It may be, it may not. The second question is what people do with them, these activities that may be harmful, they might not. How do they define them? Do they create a social agreement that there's a problem? And once they do, then individuals who engage in that activity now have a new label associated with them. If you have a problem with prostitution and you engage in a moral campaign against it as a moral entrepreneur, do you then create a label? Is it difficult for people who are then labeled prostitute to escape that life? You actually can find in the newspapers in this year in Maine a discussion of that very particular problem. And some people who are trying to create a solution in the newspapers, which is to say, well, let's take people who have done their time for prostitution and let's give them a way to erase that record so they can go forward then without having to list that on their job applications, which keeps them from having a normal job, so that they can go on and they can return, they can escape that label and its consequences, which force them back into a life of crime. This is the effect of a label, and that's what moral entrepreneurship, the drive to create these labels, has to do with labeling theory. So what do we do about that? One solution is to try to take away some of these labels after the fact, after someone goes to prison. Edwin Schur in 1973 had a more radical idea. Edwin Schur, said we should engage in radical non-intervention. Just don't do anything when there are children who have violated the law. This may seem culturally foreign to you because we live in a time of zero tolerance in schools, where if a kid writes a poem about smacking a teacher, they can get expelled from school. If they draw a picture with a gun, they can get expelled from school. It wasn't always this way. It didn't used to be this way. Edwin Schur had this idea that said, when people do this expression that might give them the label of a deviant or someone who's aggressive, a problem person, you just don't do anything. Even if they actually commit a crime, if they're a child, nothing should be done with them. Nothing should be done to them that is any involvement in the criminal justice system. If there's a way to medically treat this, if there's a way to treat it through some private psychological counseling, fine. But anything public, no. He notes this, and this is true, that most childhood delinquency stops by adulthood on its own, without any intervention in the criminal justice system. Most people who are kids who engage in criminal activity stop doing it on their own. Schur's statement, in line with labeling theory, is that if you put kids in the criminal justice system, it ensures they'll be treated like criminals, and eventually they'll start acting like them. And third, he says, look, if there's any prejudice in our society, and there is prejudice in our society, then those people who are going to get that initial label for small acts of deviant, miscreant, juvenile delinquent, problem kid, at-risk youth, are going to be in classes of people who are already discriminated against, who are going to be given these labels, and then they're going to grow up having suffered under these labels to eventually embrace that expectation. They're going to behave in a way that is going to justify somehow our future prejudice. It's going to be a way that we reinforce this inequality, in this case between black males and the rest of the United States society. So he says, as a matter of justice, as a matter of empiricism, what happens when we give people labels, and as a matter of safety, noting that most people stop their lives of crime on their own unless they get placed in the criminal justice system. He says we should engage in radical non-intervention. That is the strongest form of labeling theory that is out there.